My daughter humiliated me in front of our entire family, yelling, "Don't touch my baby! You're disgusting!" She thought she could push me out of her life for good. But when I quietly removed her from my will, she had no idea what was coming next. Before I tell you what happened next, hit like, subscribe, and tell us in the comments from which city you're watching. Your support means more than you know. Family drama has a way of sneaking up on you, even when you think you've done everything right. My name is Margaret, and for most of my life, I believed that love, patience, and sacrifice could hold a family together. I raised my daughter, Julia, as a single mother after her father left us when she was just 5. We didn't have much, but I gave her everything I could. My time, my energy, my heart. Julia was my world. I worked 2 jobs to keep her in a good school, packed her lunches with little notes, and cheered at every school play and soccer game. When she was sick, I stayed up all night by her side. When she was scared, I held her until she fell asleep. I thought our bond was unbreakable. As Julia grew older, she became more independent, more ambitious. She went to college on a scholarship, graduated with honors, and landed a job at a prestigious law firm. I was so proud of her. She met David, a charming accountant with a quick smile and a steady job. They married in a beautiful ceremony, and soon after, Julia gave birth to my first grandchild, Lily. I was over the moon. I dreamed of being the kind of grandmother who bakes cookies, tells stories, and spoils her grandchild with love. Julia and David bought a house in the suburbs, and I visited every weekend, helping with chores, cooking meals, and watching Lily so Julia could rest. I thought I was doing everything right, but slowly, things began to change. Julia became distant, her calls less frequent, her tone colder. She started making excuses for why I couldn't visit. Lily was sick, they were busy. David's parents were coming over. I brushed it off as new mom stress, but the distance grew. One afternoon, I arrived at their house with a casserole and a bag of toys for Lily. Julia met me at the door, her face tight with irritation. "Mom, you can't just show up unannounced," she snapped. "We have plans," I apologized, feeling a pang of guilt. "I just wanted to see Lily. I miss her." Julia sighed, glancing over her shoulder. "She's napping. Maybe next time, call first." I nodded, forcing a smile. "Of course. I'm sorry." I left the casserole on the counter and drove home, my heart heavy. I told myself it was just a phase, that things would get better. But the visits became even less frequent. The calls shorter, the warmth gone. David was always polite, but distant. He never intervened, never offered comfort. I started to feel like a stranger in my own family. The final straw came at Lily's 2nd birthday party. The house was filled with laughter, balloons, and the smell of cake. I brought a handmade quilt for Lily, each square stitched with love and memories from Julia's childhood. As I handed it to Lily, Julia snatched it away. "Don't touch my baby. You're disgusting," she shouted, her voice echoing through the room. The guests fell silent, all eyes on me. I stood frozen, the quilt slipping from my hands. I looked at Julia, searching her face for any sign of the daughter I once knew. But all I saw was anger, resentment, and something else, contempt. I left the party in tears, my heart shattered. I spent the night replaying her words, wondering what I had done to deserve such cruelty. I thought about all the sacrifices I had made, all the love I had given, and realized that none of it mattered to her anymore. For days, I wandered through my house in a daze, the silence louder than any argument. I looked at old photos, read Julia's childhood letters, and tried to make sense of what had happened. I called her, left messages, sent texts, no response. I felt lost, abandoned, and utterly alone. But as I sat in my empty living room, surrounded by memories of a family that no longer existed, something inside me shifted. I realized that I had spent my entire life giving, sacrificing, and forgiving. I had allowed Julia to take and take, never asking for anything in return. It was time to take my life back. The next morning, I called my lawyer, and what I decided to do next would change everything for Julia. And for me. I barely slept that night, Julia's words echoing in my mind like a curse. "Don't touch my baby. You're disgusting." I kept replaying the moment, searching for some sign that it was a misunderstanding, a slip of the tongue, or a joke gone wrong. But there was no mistaking the look in her eyes, cold, hard, and final. I was no longer her mother. I was an outsider, a burden, someone to be pushed away. The next morning, I sat at my kitchen table staring at the phone. My hands trembled as I dialed my lawyer's number. I'd known Mr. Harris for years. He'd helped me with my will after Julia was born, and again after my own mother passed away. He answered on the second ring, his voice warm and familiar. "Margaret, it's been a while. How are you?" I swallowed hard, forcing myself to speak. "Not great, Tom. I need to make some changes to my will." He paused, concern in his voice. "Is everything all right?" I hesitated, then told him everything. Julia's distance, the birthday party, her cruel words. I could hear the disbelief in his silence. "I'm so sorry, Margaret. Are you sure you want to do this?" I nodded, even though he couldn't see me. "Yes, I need to protect myself. I need to make sure my wishes are respected." We set an appointment for later that week. As I hung up, I felt a strange sense of relief. For the first time in months, I was taking control. But the pain didn't go away. I spent the next few days in a fog, going through the motions of daily life. I avoided the grocery store where Julia sometimes shopped, skipped my usual walks in the park, and ignored calls from mutual friends. I couldn't bear the thought of explaining what had happened, of reliving the humiliation. The loneliness was suffocating. I missed Lily's laughter, the way she'd run into my arms, her tiny hands clutching my fingers. I missed Julia, too, the little girl who used to beg for bedtime stories and sneak cookies from the jar. I wondered if I'd failed her somehow, if I'd loved her too much or not enough. One evening, as I was sorting through old boxes in the attic, I found a stack of letters Julia had written to me from summer camp. Her handwriting was messy, her words full of love and longing. "I miss you, Mommy. I can't wait to come home." I pressed the letters to my chest, tears streaming down my face. How had we come to this? The day of my appointment arrived. I dressed carefully, choosing a navy dress and my mother's pearl necklace. I wanted to look strong, even if I didn't feel it. Tom greeted me with a hug, his eyes kind. "Are you sure about this, Margaret?" he asked as we sat in his office. I nodded. "I have to protect myself. I can't let Julia treat me like this and still expect to inherit everything I've worked for." He nodded, pulling out my file. "We can remove her as a beneficiary. Do you want to leave anything to Lily?" I hesitated, my heart aching. "Yes, I want Lily to have my jewelry, my books, and a trust for her education. But Julia, nothing." Tom made the changes, his pen scratching across the paper. When he finished, he slid the documents across the desk. "Sign here." My hand shook as I signed, but I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. I was no longer powerless. I was no longer a victim. As I left the office, I saw Julia's car parked outside a nearby cafe. She was sitting with a group of friends, laughing, her face animated and carefree. For a moment, I considered going in, confronting her, demanding an explanation. But I stopped myself. I had nothing left to say. That night, I received a text from David. "Julia says you're upset. She wants you to apologize for causing a scene at Lily's party." I stared at the screen, disbelief and anger warring inside me. Apologize? For what? For loving my granddaughter? For bringing a handmade gift? For being a mother? I didn't respond. Instead, I poured myself a glass of wine and sat on the porch, watching the sun set. The world kept turning, indifferent to my pain. Days turned into weeks. Julia didn't call. Lily's birthday came and went, and I received a generic thank you card in the mail, signed with Julia's name in David's handwriting. The message was cold, impersonal, a final slap in the face. I started to rebuild my life, little by little. I joined a book club, volunteered at the local library, and reconnected with old friends. I found comfort in routine, in the small joys of daily life. But the wound remained, raw and aching. One afternoon, as I was cleaning out my mother's old sewing room, I found a locked box tucked away in the back of a closet. The key was taped to the bottom. My hands shook as I opened it, revealing a stack of letters, photographs, and a faded journal. As I flipped through the pages, I realized my mother had kept secrets. Secrets about our family, about Julia's father, about an inheritance I never knew existed. What I discovered in that box would change everything I thought I knew about my family, and give me the power to finally take control of my own story. I sat on the floor of my mother's old sewing room, the late afternoon sun casting golden stripes across the faded carpet. The box in my lap felt heavier than it should, as if it contained not just paper and memories, but the weight of generations. My hands trembled as I sifted through the contents. Old photographs of my parents on their wedding day, letters from my father during his time overseas, and, at the very bottom, a leather-bound journal with my mother's name embossed in gold. I opened the journal, the pages brittle with age. My mother's handwriting was elegant, looping across the paper in blue ink. The first entries were about her early years with my father, the struggles they faced, and the dreams they shared. But as I read on, the tone shifted. She wrote about secrets, about a trust fund set up by my grandfather, about land in the countryside that had been left in her name, about a safety net she'd never told anyone about. Not even me. My heart pounded as I read the final entry, dated just a few months before she passed away. If you're reading this, Margaret, it means I'm gone. I hope you never need this, but if you do, know that you are stronger than you think. The trust is for you and your family, but only if you choose to claim it. Don't let anyone make you feel small. You are the legacy. Tears blurred my vision. All these years, I'd struggled, pinching pennies, working 2 jobs, never knowing that my mother had left me a way out. I felt a surge of anger, at her for keeping it secret, at myself for never asking, and at Julia for making me feel worthless. But beneath the anger was something else. Resolve. I realized that I didn't have to be a victim anymore. I didn't have to beg for scraps of affection or tolerate Julia's cruelty. I had the power to shape my own future and to decide who would benefit from my mother's legacy. I spent the next few days in a whirlwind of activity. I called Tom, my lawyer, and told him about the trust and the land. He was stunned. "Margaret, this changes everything. You're not just comfortable, you're wealthy. You have options." We met at his office and together we tracked down the paperwork. The trust was still active, the land still in my name. All it needed was my signature to transfer the assets into my control. I signed the documents with a steady hand, feeling a sense of freedom I hadn't known in years. With Tom's help, I rewrote my will. I left the bulk of the trust to Lily, with strict instructions that Julia could not access it until Lily turned 25. I set aside a portion for charity, for the library, and the women's shelter that had supported me through the hardest times. And I made it clear that Julia would receive nothing, not a penny, not a keepsake, not even a letter. It was a decision that broke my heart, but I knew it was the right one. Julia had made her choice when she pushed me away, when she humiliated me in front of our family, when she refused to apologize. I was done begging for her love, but I wasn't done fighting for myself. I started to reclaim my life in small ways. I redecorated my house, painting the walls bright colors and filling the rooms with fresh flowers. I took a trip to the coast, walking along the beach and letting the wind carry away my regrets. I joined a painting class, rediscovering the joy of creating something beautiful with my own hands. Word of my newfound confidence spread quickly. Friends who had drifted away reached out, inviting me to dinners and book clubs. I found myself laughing again, feeling lighter, freer. But Julia was never far from my thoughts. I wondered if she missed me, if she regretted her words, if she would ever reach out. I checked my phone every night, hoping for a message, a sign, anything. One evening, as I was preparing dinner, there was a knock at the door. I opened it to find Julia standing on the porch, her eyes red from crying. "Mom," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Can we talk?" I hesitated, my heart pounding. Part of me wanted to slam the door, to protect myself from more pain. But another part, the part that had loved her since the day she was born, couldn't turn her away. I stepped aside, letting her in. She sat at the kitchen table, wringing her hands. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice barely audible. "I was angry and I took it out on you. I shouldn't have said those things. I shouldn't have pushed you away." I listened in silence, my emotions swirling. I wanted to believe her, to forgive her, to pretend that everything could go back to the way it was. But I knew better. Trust, once broken, is not so easily repaired. "I appreciate your apology, Julia," I said quietly. "But things have changed. I've changed. I can't let you hurt me anymore." She nodded, tears streaming down her face. I understand. I miss you, Mom. Lily misses you. I closed my eyes, fighting back tears. I miss you too, but I need to protect myself. I hope one day you'll understand. She left soon after, her shoulders slumped, her spirit broken. I watched her go, my heart aching, but I knew I had made the right choice. The next morning, I received a letter from Julia's lawyer. She was contesting my will. The battle for my mother's legacy and my own peace was just beginning. The letter from Julia's lawyer arrived in a thick official envelope, its weight pressing down on me before I even opened it. I sat at my kitchen table, the same place where I'd once braided Julia's hair and helped her with homework, and stared at my name typed in cold, impersonal font. My hands shook as I broke the seal. Inside was a formal notice. Julia was contesting my will, claiming undue influence and emotional distress. She wanted the trust, the land, the house, everything my mother had left for me, and everything I had chosen to pass on to Lily and to causes that mattered to me. The words stung, but what hurt most was the accusation that I was unfit, that I had manipulated my own mother's legacy for spite. I called Tom immediately. He listened quietly as I read the letter aloud, his voice calm but firm when I finished. "Margaret, you've done everything by the book. You have every right to decide what happens to your estate. But Julia's going to fight hard. Are you ready for that?" I took a deep breath. I am. I have to be. Tom got to work, gathering every document, every letter, every piece of evidence that showed my intentions were clear and my mind was sound. He contacted the bank that managed the trust, the notary who'd witnessed my signature, and even the old family friend who'd known about my mother's wishes. I wrote a letter to the court, explaining in my own words why I'd made the choices I had, how Julia's actions had broken my heart, how I still loved her, but how I couldn't reward cruelty with inheritance. The weeks that followed were a blur of meetings, phone calls, and paperwork. Julia's lawyers sent more letters, each one colder and more aggressive than the last. They accused me of favoritism, of mental decline, of being manipulated by outside influences. I felt like I was on trial for my own life, but I refused to back down. I leaned on my friends, my book club, and the women at the shelter who reminded me that standing up for yourself is never selfish. I poured my energy into the community, organizing a fundraiser for the library and volunteering at the food pantry. Every time I felt the old guilt creeping in, I reminded myself, I was not the villain in this story. Meanwhile, Julia's campaign grew more desperate. She called relatives, trying to turn them against me. She posted cryptic messages on social media, painting herself as the victim of a toxic parent. Some people believed her, but many did not. Those who knew me, who had seen the years of sacrifice, the love I'd poured into my family, stood by my side. One day, I received a call from David, Julia's husband. His voice was tired, defeated. "Margaret, I'm sorry for everything. Julia's not herself. She's angry, scared. I don't know how to help her." I sighed, my heart heavy. "I wish things were different, David. But I can't let her hurt me anymore. I hope she finds peace." The court date arrived. I dressed in my best suit, my mother's pearls around my neck, and walked into the courtroom with my head held high. Julia sat across from me, her face pale and drawn. She wouldn't meet my eyes. The judge listened to both sides, reading the documents, hearing the testimony. Tom spoke eloquently, laying out the facts with compassion and clarity. Julia's lawyer tried to paint me as vindictive, but the evidence was overwhelming. I had acted with love, with reason, and with the full support of the law. After hours of arguments, the judge made his ruling. My will would stand. The trust would go to Lily, the land to charity, and Julia would receive nothing. The judge's words were final, but the look on Julia's face was what stayed with me. Shock, anger, and, beneath it all, a deep, aching sadness. I left the courthouse feeling both victorious and hollow. I had protected my mother's legacy and my own. I had stood up for myself in the face of betrayal, but I had also lost my daughter, perhaps forever. That night, I sat on my porch, the cool air brushing against my skin, and wondered if I had done the right thing. Was justice always this lonely? Was revenge ever truly sweet? As I pondered these questions, a letter arrived in the mail. This time, not from a lawyer, but from Julia herself. The words inside would force me to confront everything I thought I knew about forgiveness, family, and what it means to move on. The envelope was handwritten, my name in Julia's familiar script. I hesitated before opening it, my heart pounding with a mix of dread and hope. I sat at the kitchen table, the same place where so much of our family's history had unfolded, and carefully unfolded the letter. Mom, I know you probably don't want to hear from me. I know I've hurt you, and I can't take back what I said or did. I was angry, scared, and I lashed out at the person who loved me most. I thought I was protecting Lily, but really, I was just protecting myself from facing how much I've changed, and how much I've lost myself in the process. I contested your will because I was desperate. I felt like you were abandoning me, and I wanted to hurt you back. But sitting in that courtroom, seeing you stand so strong, I realized how wrong I was. I saw the woman who raised me, who sacrificed everything for me, and I saw how far I'd fallen from the daughter you deserved. I'm sorry, Mom. I don't expect forgiveness, and I know I don't deserve your trust. But I want you to know that I'm trying to change. I've started therapy. I'm working on being a better mother to Lily, and a better person. I hope, someday, you'll let me try to be a better daughter, too. Love, Julia. I read the letter twice, tears streaming down my face. The pain of the past year, the betrayal, the courtroom battles, the loneliness, washed over me. But so did something else. Relief. Julia's words were raw, honest, and for the first time in a long time, I felt a glimmer of hope. I didn't respond right away. I needed time to process, to let the wounds scab over before I could even think about reopening them. But I carried the letter with me, tucked into my purse, a reminder that even the deepest family drama could shift, that even the most toxic relationships could change, if only a little. Meanwhile, life moved forward. The community projects I'd started flourished. I was invited to speak at the library's annual fundraiser, sharing my story of betrayal, justice, and the power of standing up for yourself. People came up to me afterward, sharing their own stories of family conflict and emotional revenge, thanking me for giving them hope. Lily's trust was set up, and I made sure she would have everything she needed for her future: education, security, and a legacy of love that skipped a generation but would never skip her. I wrote her a letter to be opened on her 18th birthday, telling her about her grandmother, her mother, and the choices we made out of pain and love. One afternoon, as I was tending the garden, a car pulled into my driveway. Julia stepped out, holding Lily's hand. She looked nervous but determined. I met them at the gate, my heart in my throat. "Hi, Mom," Julia said softly. "Lily wanted to see you." Lily ran into my arms, her laughter like music. Julia stood back, watching us, tears in her eyes. "I know I have a lot to make up for," she whispered. "But I want to try," I nodded, unable to speak. We spent the afternoon together, baking cookies, playing in the yard, and talking, really talking, for the first time in years. It wasn't perfect. The wounds were still there, but so was the possibility of healing. That night, as I watched Julia and Lily drive away, I realized that revenge had given me back my power, but forgiveness was giving me back my family. But just as I began to hope for a new beginning, a phone call from Tom brought news that would test everything I'd learned about trust, justice, and the true meaning of family. Tom's voice on the phone was grave, the kind of tone that made my heart skip. "Margaret, I need to talk to you about something important. Can you come by the office tomorrow?" I barely slept that night, my mind racing with possibilities. Had Julia changed her mind again? Was there another legal challenge? Or was it something else? Something I hadn't even considered? The next morning, I arrived at Tom's office, my nerves raw. He greeted me with a reassuring smile, but I could see the concern in his eyes. "Margaret, I received a letter from Julia's lawyer. She's officially withdrawn her contest of your will. The case is closed, but there's more." He slid a folder across the desk. Inside were documents, bank statements, emails, and a letter from my mother's old attorney. As I read, the truth became clear. My mother's trust had grown over the years, quietly accumulating interest and dividends. The land she left me had recently been rezoned for development, making it worth far more than I'd ever imagined. I was, in a word, wealthy, far beyond what I'd thought. I sat back, stunned. Why didn't my mother ever tell me? Tom smiled gently. Maybe she wanted you to find your own strength first. Or maybe she just wanted you to have a safety net, no matter what happened. The realization was overwhelming. I had spent so many years struggling, sacrificing, and feeling small. Now, I had the means to help others, to build a legacy that went beyond money. I decided then and there to expand my charitable giving, to fund scholarships for single mothers, and to support the library and shelter that had been my lifeline. As the weeks passed, Julia and I continued to rebuild our relationship, slowly and carefully. She came to therapy with me, and we talked about the past, about her anger, my pain, and the ways we'd both failed each other. It wasn't easy. There were setbacks, tears, and moments when I wondered if forgiveness was even possible. But we kept trying, for Lily's sake, and for our own. Lily became the bridge between us, her innocence and joy reminding us of what truly mattered. She loved spending weekends at my house, baking cookies, reading stories, and planting flowers in the garden. I wrote her letters, just as my mother had written to me, hoping that one day she would understand the choices I'd made. The community noticed the changes, too. People who had once whispered about my family drama now came to me for advice, for comfort, for hope. I became a mentor to women in my support group, helping them navigate their own betrayals and find their own strength. But not everyone was happy about my newfound success. Old acquaintances resurfaced, some with outstretched hands, others with bitter words. Rumors spread, and a few distant relatives tried to challenge the will again, hoping for a share of the fortune. But this time I was ready. I stood my ground, protected by Tom, by the law, and by the unshakable knowledge that I had earned everything I had. One evening, as I sat on the porch watching the sun set, Julia joined me. She took my hand, her grip warm and steady. "Thank you, Mom, for not giving up on me, for teaching me what real strength looks like." I squeezed her hand, tears in my eyes. "We're both stronger than we think, Julia, and we're both still learning." As the sky faded to twilight, I realized that justice isn't always about punishment. Sometimes it's about healing. Sometimes it's about letting go of the past and building something new. But just as I began to feel at peace, a letter arrived in the mail, this time from someone I hadn't heard from in decades. The secrets inside would force me to confront the final chapter of my family's story. The letter was postmarked from a small town I hadn't visited since childhood. The handwriting was unfamiliar, but the name on the return address made my breath catch. Samuel Carter, my ex-husband, Julia's father. I hadn't heard from him in over 30 years, not since he walked out on us and disappeared into a new life. My hands shook as I opened the envelope, the paper inside crisp and heavy. "Margaret, I know I have no right to ask for anything after all these years. I heard about your mother's passing, and more recently, about the family drama. I'm not writing to ask for forgiveness or for money. I'm writing because I'm dying. I have cancer and not much time left. I want to see Julia one last time, and if she's willing, to meet my granddaughter. I know I don't deserve it, but I had to try. I'm sorry for everything. I hope you can find it in your heart to let me say goodbye." Sammy sat in silence, the letter trembling in my hands. The past I thought I'd buried was suddenly at my doorstep, demanding to be faced. I thought of Julia, of all the pain she'd carried from his absence, and of Lily, who had no idea her grandfather was still alive. That evening, I called Julia. My voice was gentle as I explained the letter, reading Sam's words aloud. She was silent for a long time, her breath shaky on the other end of the line. "I don't know if I can forgive him, Mom," she finally whispered. "But maybe I need to try. For Lily. For myself." We agreed to visit Sam together, to give him a chance to say goodbye, and to give ourselves a chance to close the door on a chapter that had haunted us for too long. The drive to his small apartment was quiet, the air thick with memories and unspoken fears. Sam was frail, his hair gone, his eyes sunken but bright with hope. He wept when he saw Julia, apologizing over and over, his voice breaking with regret. Julia listened, her face a mask of pain and compassion. When Lily hugged him, he sobbed, holding her as if she were the last good thing in the world. We stayed for hours, talking, sharing stories, and letting old wounds breathe. When we left, Julia squeezed my hand. "Thank you, Mom, for giving me this chance, for helping me let go." In the weeks that followed, Sam passed away peacefully. Julia and I attended his small funeral, saying our goodbyes not just to him, but to the ghosts of our past. We left flowers on his grave, and as we walked away, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. Back home, life settled into a new rhythm. Julia and I grew closer, our bond stronger for all we'd endured. Lily thrived, surrounded by love and stories of the family that had come before her. I continued my work in the community, using my resources to help others find hope after heartbreak. The shadows of the past lingered, but they no longer defined us. We had faced betrayal, loss, and the hardest truths about ourselves, and we had chosen healing, forgiveness, and love. As the next holiday season approached, Julia surprised me with a question that would open the door to a new chapter for our family. "Mom, would you ever consider writing our story? I think it could help a lot of people." Julia's question lingered in the air, both an invitation and a challenge. "Would you ever consider writing our story? I think it could help a lot of people." I looked at her, seeing not just my daughter, but a woman who had walked through fire and come out stronger, wiser, and more compassionate. I realized that our journey, full of family drama, betrayal, heartbreak, and ultimately forgiveness, wasn't just ours. It was a story that could resonate with anyone who's ever felt lost or alone in the chaos of toxic relationships. That night, I sat at my desk, a blank notebook in front of me. I began to write, not just for myself or for Julia, but for Lily, and for every person who needed to know that healing is possible, even after the deepest wounds. I wrote about the pain of being pushed away, the courage it took to stand up for myself, and the bittersweet satisfaction of justice served. I wrote about the power of forgiveness, not as a gift to those who hurt us, but as a way to free ourselves from the past. As the weeks passed, Julia and I worked on the story together. We laughed, we cried, and we remembered moments we'd both tried to forget. Lily listened to our stories, asking questions and offering her own innocent wisdom. The process brought us even closer, helping us see how far we'd come and how much we'd grown. The holidays arrived, and our home was filled with warmth, laughter, and the quiet joy of a family that had chosen to heal. We invited friends, neighbors, and even a few people from my support group who had nowhere else to go. There was no tension, no walking on eggshells, just gratitude for second chances and the love that had survived so much. On New Year's Eve, Julia handed me a small, wrapped box. Inside was a beautiful pen engraved with the words, "For the next chapter." Tears filled my eyes as I hugged her, knowing that our story was far from over. As I look back on everything we endured, the betrayal, the courtroom battles, the painful reckonings, I realize that revenge gave me back my power, but forgiveness gave me back my family. Justice was served, but healing was the true victory. And if you're watching this, maybe you've faced your own family betrayals, your own battles with toxic relationships. Maybe you're still searching for your happy ending. I want you to know, you're not alone. There's always hope, always a way forward, even when it feels impossible. If this story touched you, if you found strength or comfort in our journey, please hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and share your own story in the comments. Your voice matters, and your support helps us keep telling these powerful true stories of family, betrayal, and redemption. Thank you for watching, for listening, and for being part of our community. Until next time, take care of yourself. And remember, justice, love, and healing are always possible, no matter how dark the past may seem.